Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to return to the public lobby. This section is for registered patients and their immediate families. Alec Finlay looked at the woman behind the admissions desk, Bryn, Patient Services, and kept his voice low so his daughter wouldn't hear the tightness in it. We're here to visit the therapeutic garden. I understood it's open during visiting hours. Bryn glanced at Nell, 8 years old, dark braids, holding a small cloth rabbit she still carried everywhere, then at Alec's worn canvas jacket and the old duffel bag over his shoulder. Something shifted behind her expression without actually moving. Interior grounds are for patients and registered companions only. We can't accommodate general visitors. She had already looked back at her screen before she finished the sentence. Alec had driven 3 hours from Calgary that morning through an early October frost, arriving at the Millbrook Medical Center in Lethbridge just as the rain started. He had a booking confirmation on his phone under the name A. Cole, a guest pass issued by the clinic's own online system, and a reason for being there that no one in that building would have guessed from looking at him. He had co-founded Millbrook 17 years ago. He had helped design this lobby, chosen the flooring, argued with the contractor about the placement of the windows, so patients arriving for difficult diagnoses would have something natural to look at. His name was on the founding documents in the administrative archives, 3 floors above them. He had not told anyone he was coming. That was deliberate. For 11 months, Alec had been reading the same kind of message in different forms. Patients describing long waits for basic responses, unexpected fees added to accounts without explanation, a staff culture that seemed more concerned with procedure than people. Several experienced nurses had resigned without public comment. Online reviews praised the facility's equipment while questioning the atmosphere. He had asked Gareth Slade, the clinic's chief operating officer, for explanations. Gareth sent back immaculate reports, patient satisfaction metrics, staffing efficiency scores, financial summaries. The numbers were always clean, too clean. Nothing in them matched what was arriving in Alec's inbox from people who had no reason to fabricate. A formal inspection would have prepared them. Gareth would have polished every surface, briefed every staff member, staged a version of Millbrook that existed only for the duration of the visit. If Alec wanted to understand what this place had become, he had to arrive as someone no one would prepare for. So he had booked under a different name, pulled an old jacket from the back of his closet, packed a bag that looked like it had been through a decade of hard use. And he brought Nell because today was the 2nd anniversary of Harriet's death, and he had made a quiet promise to himself that they would sit together in the garden this year. Nell had been 6 the last time they were there. She remembered the light through the glass panels and the birds that somehow found their way into the courtyard, and her mother's hand on her shoulder in the final weeks when Harriet still had the energy to sit outside. Nell had asked twice in the car if they were almost there. She had clutched her rabbit the whole drive. "Dad," she said now, beside him at the desk, "are we going to the garden?" "In a bit," he said. Bryn had not looked up again. They were directed to the public waiting area near the main entrance, a row of chairs beside a window that looked out onto the car park. Nell sat very straight the way she did when she was trying to show she was cold, which she was, because her sweater was still damp from the rain and no one offered them towels. They watched 3 other families check in without difficulty. One of them, a couple in expensive coats, arrived without a booking at all, and Bryn found them a slot within 2 minutes. Nell watched the couple walk through the interior doors. "Did they forget us?" she asked quietly. "No," Alec said, "they see us." She looked at him with the particular look she gave when she understood more than he thought she did. While they waited, Alec noticed the things that did not appear in reports. A woman at the far end of the waiting room was trying to explain a billing discrepancy to a staff member who kept glancing at his watch. An older gentleman arrived and asked where the patient advocate's office was, and the receptionist on duty told him, incorrectly, that it had closed on Thursdays. It hadn't. It was 2 doors to the left, but the sign had been taken down. The gentleman wandered the corridor for several minutes before sitting down in confusion. A nurse passed him twice and said nothing. These were not isolated mistakes. They had the texture of routine. Nearly 40 minutes passed. Then a young woman in blue scrubs appeared from a side corridor and stopped when she saw Nell. Her name tag read Sloan, Patient Care Coordinator. She was carrying a supply tray but set it on a nearby chair, crouched slightly, and handed Nell a juice box she had brought from the children's intake station down the hall. "You've been waiting a while," she said. "I thought you might be thirsty." Nell looked at her with large, grateful eyes and accepted it carefully. Before Alec could thank her, a woman in a dark blazer crossed the lobby with the fast, angular steps of someone who had made a habit of arriving just as things happened without her approval. Her name tag read Rochelle Baird, Director of Patient Experience. She looked at Sloan with an expression that managed to be both flat and sharp at once. "What are you doing?" Rochelle asked, not loudly, but in the way that is more effective than loud. Sloan straightened. "The child has been waiting since intake, I thought. Complimentary refreshments are for admitted patients only. You know the policy." "She's 8. The policy doesn't have an age clause." Rochelle reached past Nell and removed the juice box from her hands. Nell's fingers were still curved from holding it. Alec stood up, not quickly, just deliberately. Rochelle turned to him with a practiced look of composed authority. "I apologize for any confusion, sir, but we maintain standards across the facility to ensure equity of service. You took a juice box from my daughter. I applied facility policy." "Which policy, specifically?" Rochelle paused. "Complimentary refreshments are budgeted for patient care, not for the general waiting area." Alec looked at Nell. She was watching the juice box in Rochelle's hand with the same careful stillness. Harriet used to go quiet in before she said the truest thing in the room. "Is that written somewhere?" Alec asked. "Can you show me where it says that?" "Sir, I'm asking a reasonable question." Rochelle folded her arms. "If you'd like to file a formal inquiry, I can direct you to the patient relations portal. I'd like you to give my daughter the juice box." Rochelle did not. She placed it on the reception counter, told Bryn to log it as recovered stock, and walked back the way she had come. Sloan watched her go, then looked at Alec with an expression caught between apology and something that had been building for a long time. "I'm sorry," Sloan said quietly. "Don't be," Alec said. "I saw what you did, that matters." She looked like she hadn't heard that in a while. A few minutes later, a man arrived at the desk carrying a paper bag with a pharmacy logo on the side and a folded sheet of printed correspondence. He was in his late 60s, trim and careful in his movements, with the precise stillness of someone who had been composed for so long it had become structural. His name, Alec would learn shortly, was Lloyd Kimura. He was a retired high school science teacher from Lethbridge. His wife, Ines, had been a long-term patient at Millbrook for 8 months, a progressive neurological condition requiring regular monitoring and specialized care. When she was admitted, they had been told the clinic offered family companion hours until 8 in the evening. 3 weeks ago, that had changed. Companion hours now ended at 5, and exceptions required written medical justification submitted 48 hours in advance. No one had notified existing families. Lloyd had simply shown up one evening and been turned away. He had submitted the justification form. It had not been processed. He was here now to ask again, in person, with a letter written in the careful handwriting of someone who believed that clarity of expression was a form of respect. The staff member at intake looked at the letter, then the screen, then at Lloyd with the expression of someone trained to project sympathy without authorizing anything. "I'll flag it for the patient relations team," she said. "You flagged it last week," Lloyd said. "I understand your frustration. I haven't seen my wife in 4 days." He said it without drama, just steadily, the way you state a fact whose weight needs no amplification. "We've been married 41 years. She has good days and difficult days, and she asks for me on both." The staff member began to type something. Lloyd looked at his letter, then at the counter. He set the pharmacy bag down carefully. He looked like a man deciding whether patience was still the appropriate response. Alec moved over to him and introduced himself simply as Alec. Lloyd offered a quiet smile and explained the situation in the same even tone, pausing once to check that Alec was still paying attention. Apparently, this was unusual enough to warrant confirmation. "How often does this happen?" Alec asked. "Not just to you." Lloyd considered the question seriously. "There's a woman who comes Wednesdays. Her daughter is in the palliative unit. She has been charged twice for services marked complimentary in her daughter's care plan. I have seen at least 4 other families turned away from companion hours because of forms they never received. People complain, but I'm told complaints are reviewed quarterly." He paused. "By the time they are reviewed, most people have stopped coming." Alec felt the picture settle into place. This was not bureaucratic drift or understaffing or a manager who had made poor calls under pressure. This was a system. Policies adjusted to reduce family presence. Billing practices that extracted revenue from people too exhausted or too frightened to push back. Complaints routed into a queue with a delay long enough to outlast the complainant's resolve. Sloan had been reprimanded for giving a child a juice box. Lloyd had driven across the city and was being made to wait for a form that would never be processed. And somewhere on the second floor, in a courtyard Alec and Harriet had designed together. The garden she had insisted on when everyone else said it would go over budget. The space she called not a luxury, but a clinical necessity. Where she had sat in an autumn coat 2 Octobers ago with Nell in her lap and the last real warmth of the sun on her face. Something was waiting for him. He was not ready, but it was waiting. "I'd like to speak with your chief operating officer," Alec said to the staff member at intake. "Mr. Slade is quite busy. Please let him know a visitor is requesting a conversation regarding companion hour access, billing discrepancies, and intake conduct, and that I'd like to discuss it before I make a few phone calls." The staff member looked uncertain. She picked up the handset. Gareth Slade arrived 8 minutes later in a charcoal suit, moving with the ease of a man who believed he could resolve any visitor concern in under 5 minutes. He shook Alec's hand with calibrated warmth. He did not look at Lloyd. "Mr. Cole," he said, using the name from the booking. "I understand there's been some difficulty this morning." "Quite a bit," Alec said. "Mr. Kimura hasn't seen his wife in 4 days because of a policy change never communicated to his family. A staff member was reprimanded for giving my daughter something to drink. And the patient advocate's office signage has been removed, so families can't find services they don't know still exist." Gareth's smile held its shape. "We've been implementing operational adjustments to improve resource allocation. Change management always involves a transition period." "Does the transition period include separating a patient from her husband?" The companion hour revision was communicated through standard channels. Lloyd spoke quietly. "It was not communicated to us." Gareth glanced at him briefly. "We can review your specific case through the patient relations process, Mr. Kimura. My wife's name is Ines." "Of course." Gareth turned back to Alec with the smooth pivot of someone practiced in redirecting discomfort. "Mr. Cole, I'd be happy to arrange a complimentary upgrade for you and your daughter as a gesture of good faith. There's a family lounge on the ground floor." "What I'd like," Alec said, "is to take my daughter to the therapeutic garden on the second floor. We have a booking confirmation and a personal reason for being there." Something in Gareth's manner shifted very slightly. "I'm afraid the second floor courtyard is currently unavailable for general access." "Why?" "It's been designated as a staff wellness area while we review facility programming." Alec was quiet for a moment. "The therapeutic garden has been converted into a staff space. A temporary repurposing, the garden programming was underutilized." Nell had been listening. She leaned against Alec's arm and looked up at him. "Dad, is the garden gone?" He placed his hand gently on her shoulder and did not answer immediately. "The garden is still there," he said finally. "It just needs someone to take care of it." Gareth began explaining something about staffing priorities and patient programming metrics. Alec was no longer listening to the words. He was looking at Nell, who had pressed her rabbit against her chest and was staring at the floor with a stillness he knew too well. The quiet Harriet went into before she said the truest thing in the room. "Dad," Nell said, "would they let us in if they knew who you were?" Gareth stopped speaking. Alec looked at his daughter. "That," he said, "is exactly what I needed to find out." He would have said more, but at that moment a sound cut across the lobby, a sharp involuntary gasp from the waiting area, followed by a chair scraping hard across the floor, followed by someone saying, "Please, someone, she needs help." The elderly woman who had been trying to explain her billing discrepancy for the past half hour had gone very pale. Her breathing was audible and wrong, shallow, strained, the kind that precedes something worse. The staff member beside her stepped back and reached for a phone. "I need to contact the on-duty supervisor before I can initiate the emergency." Alec moved. He crossed the waiting area in seconds, crouched beside the woman, and checked her breathing and pulse with the focused efficiency of hands that remembered exactly what to do. Before anyone had processed what was happening, he was already speaking. "Call emergency services," he said, loudly enough to land with authority. "Now, not after authorization, now." Sloan was already at the phone. "Does she have a known cardiac history?" he asked the woman beside her. A daughter, by the look of her, who nodded and said yes, a stent 2 years ago. Alec turned to the nearest staff member. "The emergency response cabinet. West corridor, third door on the left, behind the lower panel beneath the supply rack. There is an AED and a first response kit. Go and get it." The staff member stared at him. "Guests aren't permitted to." "Go." The man went. Gareth, standing at the edge of the gathering, said something about protocol. Rochelle appeared from somewhere and began asking people to step back and refrain from recording on their phones. Sloan had finished the emergency call and came directly to Alec's side. 4 minutes, she said. Tell them to use the service entrance on the north side and come up the staff corridor directly to this wing. The main elevator runs slow. The freight access is faster. Rochelle turned to him. You cannot redirect emergency services. I am telling them the fastest route through this building. He looked at her steadily. Unless you would like to explain to this woman's family why we didn't use the extra 30 seconds well. Rochelle went quiet. Sloan was already back on the phone. The staff member returned with the kit. Alec worked methodically, calmly, with the particular authority that does not require raising its voice. The woman's breathing steadied. Her daughter held her hand. When the paramedics came through the North Service corridor exactly where Alec had directed them, he briefed them with clinical precision. Symptoms, timeline, known history, current status, and stepped back without needing to be asked. The daughter caught his arm before they moved her mother out. How did you know where the kit was, she said. The staff didn't know. Alec said nothing. He looked at Gareth. Gareth was looking at him in an entirely different way. Who are you? Gareth said. The lobby had gone very still. Sloan stood near the supply corridor watching. Lloyd had moved closer. Nell stood beside her father with her rabbit held in both arms. Alec straightened his jacket. He took out his phone, made a call, 2 sentences, and placed it back in his pocket. Then he looked at Gareth and Rochelle and waited. The elevator on the east wall opened 3 minutes later. A woman in a gray coat entered the lobby carrying a leather folder. Constance Weir, Millbrook Medical Center's head of corporate compliance, a name every member of senior management would recognize from quarterly review meetings. She was accompanied by 2 members of Alec's administrative team from Calgary. She walked past Gareth without stopping and stood directly in front of Alec. The full records have been secured, she said. Complaint logs, billing files, companion access records, staff communications, and system audit trails as requested. The data mirror was completed before you arrived this morning. The silence in the lobby changed quality. Gareth's face did something complicated. You arranged this before you came in. I suspected reports were being altered before they reached me, Alec said. I needed to see what the real records said. Rochelle looked at Constance, then at the folder, then at the company letterhead on its cover, which she knew very well. Mr. Finlay, Constance said. The name settled across the lobby like weather. Sloane's expression changed first. Not to shock, but to something that looked like relief, the expression of someone who had been waiting a long time for the room to shift in the right direction. Rochelle turned slowly toward the wall beside the main entrance, where a framed photograph hung from the clinic's opening year. A man and a woman in their early 30s, standing in front of a building not yet open to anyone, both of them smiling with the particular happiness of people who have just built something they believe in. The man was thinner, younger. The woman beside him had her hand on his arm and was laughing at something off camera. Nell had followed Rochelle's gaze. She pointed at the photograph. That's my dad, she said. Her finger moved to the woman beside him, and that's my mum. The folder slipped from Rochelle's grip. Gareth straightened his jacket in the way people do when they have realized it no longer helps. Alec, Mr. Finlay, there has clearly been a significant breakdown in communication. We had no way of knowing. That's exactly the point, Alec said. You weren't supposed to know, because I needed to see how this place runs when you believe no one who matters is watching. He paused. I needed to know if my wife was right about what this place could become. He said it quietly. The lobby was quiet enough that everyone heard it. Constance opened the folder and began reading from the preliminary findings. Companion hour access had been reduced by 60% over 14 months with no patient notification. Billing adjustments had been applied to 47 accounts without itemized explanation. 11 staff complaints regarding workplace conduct had been filed and not entered into the formal review system. Patient satisfaction data submitted to the corporate office had been altered in 3 consecutive quarters. Original scores replaced with figures averaging 22% higher. The emergency response kit that Alec had directed staff to retrieve had been relocated from its standard position without updating the facility orientation guide or informing on-call personnel. 2 previous near-miss incidents involving delayed emergency access had not been reported upward. As Constance read, each explanation that Gareth and Rochelle offered found no purchase. The numbers were in front of everyone. The staff who had stayed silent at the periphery of the lobby stood very still. Alec looked at Gareth and Rochelle and kept his voice even. Your employment with Finlay Health Group ends today, he said. Constance will coordinate the transition with HR and legal. Your access to all systems, communications, and patient records is suspended effective immediately. Gareth said something about operational continuity. Rochelle said the decisions had been made under pressure with limited resources in a difficult environment. Alec listened to both of them and then said that the people in the waiting area, Lloyd, the families, the woman whose mother had just been taken out by paramedics, had also been operating in a difficult environment, with the difference that they had not had the option of passing their difficulty on to someone more vulnerable. Security met Gareth and Rochelle at the east corridor. Alec turned to Sloane, who was standing near the supply room door with the careful stillness of someone waiting to find out what happened next. "Your position is not only safe," he said. "The shifts you've lost over the past 3 months will be reviewed and compensated, and I'd like you on the Patient Care Oversight Committee we're forming if you're willing." Sloane opened her mouth and closed it again. "I was just doing what seemed right," she said finally. "I know," Alec said. "That's why I'm asking." He found Lloyd near the elevator, coat buttoned, the pharmacy bag still in hand. "Mr. Kimura," Alec said, "I want to apologize, not on behalf of a policy or a staffing decision, but personally. This clinic was built on a specific set of beliefs, and we failed to protect them. That failure belongs to me as much as anyone." Lloyd was quiet for a moment. "Will I be able to see Enos tonight?" "Tonight," Alec said, "with companion hours extended back to 8 o'clock, effective immediately and permanently, and with a full audit of your billing going back to her date of admission." Lloyd pressed his lips together in the particular way of someone who is not going to cry in a public lobby but is aware that the possibility is close. He thanked Alec without looking directly at him, then stepped into the elevator and let the doors close. Alec stood in the lobby as Constance's team moved through the facility, and the staff remaining began the slow recalibration of a room that had been reminded of what it was supposed to be. He looked at the photograph on the wall, Harriet laughing. He remembered the exact moment. She had spotted a sparrow land on the scaffolding and made a remark about good omens that he had pretended to dismiss because he was worried about the contractor's timeline, and she had known he was pretending. Nell slipped her hand into his. "Can we still go to the garden?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "We're going to the garden." The second-floor courtyard when they reached it was exactly as he had feared. Plastic chairs, a folding table, a whiteboard with a staff rota on it. The raised planters Harriet had specified, wide enough for a wheelchair, she had insisted, wide enough for a person to sit beside someone who needed sitting beside, were full of folded linens. The glass panels were filmed with dust. The automated watering system had been disconnected. And the plaque was gone. He found it 20 minutes later, face down in a storage box beneath a roll of paper towel in the room adjacent to the courtyard. In memory of Alec Finlay, physician, co-founder, who believed that healing was not only clinical. The mounting holes were still visible in the wall outside. Nell reached out and touched her mother's name with 2 fingers. Then she looked at the linens in the planters and the dust on the glass and the staff rota chalked across the whiteboard, and she was quiet for a moment. "We can fix it," Alec said. "You always say that." "I know." He crouched down to her level. "And I always mean it. But I need you to know something else." He waited until she looked at him. "I should have come back sooner. Your mum built this place because she believed something, and I let other people have it without checking whether they believed the same things. That was my fault." Nell considered this with the seriousness she gave everything. "She would have checked," she said. "She would have checked the second week," Alec agreed. Nell looked at the plaque again. "Can we put it back up today?" "Today," he said, "and we're going to get some things back in those planters. Clean those windows. Chase whatever bird has found its way in here." He stood up. "But first, I think Sloane might be able to find us a juice box." Nell smiled for the first time since they had arrived. In the months that followed, Millbrook Medical Center changed in the ways that don't make headlines but are felt the moment you walk through the door. A new patient advisory panel was established, with families and long-term patients represented alongside clinical staff. Companion hours were restored and protected in writing. Billing moved to a transparent itemized system with a patient advocate review option built in. Emergency response training was standardized, kit locations mapped and confirmed in the orientation guide. Staff could report concerns through an independent channel that did not route through facility management. Sloane became the panel's first patient care liaison. People who visited Millbrook in those months noticed something different in the lobby. A quality of attention, a willingness to stop and be still with a person for a moment longer than procedure required. Lloyd Kimura visited Ines every evening. The second-floor courtyard was restored. New plantings, cleaned glass, the watering system reconnected. Harriet's plaque went back on the wall beside the entrance, cleaned and re-leveled, accompanied by a small additional line that had not been there before. These grounds are dedicated to the belief that everyone who enters here deserves to be treated as though they matter. Alec became a presence at Millbrook in the way he hadn't been since Harriet was alive. Not as a distant executive reviewing documents from Calgary, but as someone who walked the corridors and sometimes sat in the waiting room without telling anyone who he was. One morning in late November, he and Nell were in the lobby when a man in work clothes arrived with a teenage boy whose arm was in a makeshift sling. The man spoke to Bryn at intake with the careful deference of someone unsure whether he was in the right place, explaining quietly that they didn't have private coverage, but his son had taken a bad fall and he wanted to make sure it was looked at properly. Bryn paused for exactly a moment. Then Sloane appeared from the corridor beside her, as she often did now, with the particular attentiveness of someone who had trained herself to notice the arrivals that other people's eyes moved past. "Come on in," she said warmly and without qualification. "We'll get you sorted." The man's shoulders dropped about 2 inches. Nell, sitting beside Alec in the waiting area, watched the three of them walk through the interior doors together and disappear down the corridor. Then she looked at the plaque on the wall near the garden entrance, where her mother's name was back where it belonged. She slipped her hand into Alec's. He held it and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said.